former number 10 advisor, the man who, well, sort of, what do we say, moved to reform. Sometimes.
Well, they say defected, but defected makes you sound like sort of dodgy, doesn't it, really?
No, defecated makes you sound dodgy, doesn't it, to be honest?
By the way, I like the throaty voice.
Do you?
I know you've been through hell, but the voice is pretty good. Yeah.
I'm trying,
very husky.
I'm trying not to shout, and I'm trying to keep it there.
I like it.
On a serious note.
Don't get the wrong idea, but I like it.
Thank you very much indeed, dear. Thank you, darling. Anyway, so we saw each other at that Reform party on the Thursday.
And that was the last time you were properly well?
Absolutely been ill ever since then. So I haven't had a chance to talk to you. Is it a difficult decision?
To leave... I underestimated how difficult it would be. I joined for ideological reasons, and then I think the Conservative Party is kaput, and that's why I left. But I could deal with the people who are angry with me for leaving, but the people who are generally sad, who I've worked with over a number of years in the Conservative Party, that's actually... I underestimated how hard that would be, because listeners may not completely understand this, but a political party isn't just a political party, it's like a family. Sure. You spend an awful lot of your time with these people, on the streets, campaigning, at parties,
so
at
it's not the people who are calling you every name under the sun, it's the ones who
I can cope with that, but it's when people are generally sad and think, all that we built together, all that we worked together, and we won't see each other anymore. And I say, well, we still could be friends.
Does it affect friendships?
It's affected a few, but to be honest, if it's a true friendship, it doesn't affect it.
Completely. Yeah. So much to talk about. The obvious way to start with you, as a man who's defecated to reform. I love that, it's great.
Please stop that, please stop that. I don't want that
Musk. I'm quite outspoken on this. Obviously, before Christmas, Mar-a-Lago, Nigel, the new treasurer, Nick Candy, the billionaire, and Musk, and then this sort of admission that there could be a massive donation up to £100 million, and the Conservatives and Labour jumping up and down saying this
always
isn't right.
A bit exaggerated,
of course. And then you have the Tommy Robinson thing, a convicted felon who, as I think Benedict Spence put quite cleverly earlier, might ideologically be fine to some people, but will never be elected and will never be embraced because of the things that he's done. Unfortunately, that's the way the world acts. In his case, correctly in those instances. Musk has taken a little bit of that story, and suddenly overnight, Nigel says, I don't want him in my party. Most people would say that was the right thing to do. Yeah. Musk says, we need a new leader. He's not up to it. What's your response?
Well, look, Elon Musk is a brilliant man. You know, SpaceX, Telsa, Twitter. He's a great innovator. He's probably like the Da Vinci of our times. Yeah. You know, really brilliant man. But you see him on Twitter, X, whatever we call it now, it's like 20 tweets every hour on all different subjects. No one, even with a massive brain, can come up with views that quickly. And so I don't know whether today he regrets his view that he expressed yesterday about Nigel Farage, but it looked a little bit to me like a rush of blood to the head. But I'm kind of...
Ill-informed. Nigel Farage out there is a god to many people. To many, he's not.
Yeah.
But there are millions of people in this country who believe that Nigel Farage is speaking the language that this country needs.
Well, there's absolutely... What is true, Jeremy, is there's absolutely no one else who could lead reform and make them a popular force in British politics. No one else.
But let's talk about... This is really... I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. But let's talk about the next stage. So Musk would look at a Donald Trump figure who has battled assassination attempts, criminal convictions, women accusing him of all sorts of things, people calling him a convicted rapist, blah, 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 to win the popular vote in the US for the first time in 30 years. I think that's a fact.
Yeah.
You couldn't do that in this country, I suspect. I suspect in this country you can have your views that are important, but as I was saying earlier to Benedict, you would need to show yourself, would you, moderate to a degree, centrist to a degree, to get elected. Nigel absolutely is that person. We had Ben Habib on at the beginning of the show. I'd love your take on this as well. He says the problem with the party now is it's not democratised. It's Nigel Farage's private company, and anything he says goes. Yeah. That surely has to change, but no, there shouldn't be no doubt, should there? I think this is where Elon Musk got it right, that nobody can galvanise people politically right now the way that Nigel Farage can.
100%. And look, there are probably 2-3% of people who listen to this show who are worried about the democratisation of
What does that mean?
Exactly. But I tell you what, and I found this yesterday. I live in Salisbury. I was in the pub last night having a few drinks with friends. And what they think about, what's holding sort of Middle England back from voting reform is the idea that somehow there's racist, there's nasty people involved. And what people noticed yesterday, You know, only a couple of people, but they noticed that Nigel Farage said no to Tommy Robinson. Now, they think Elon Musk is a bit mad. They like him, they respect him, but what they noticed was that Nigel Farage said no. You know, he stood up to Elon Musk and he said, I'm not going to have someone who's committed mortgage fraud, who's been held in contempt of court 3 times. You know, we could go on through the list of things. Tommy Robinson's got lots of things right, but he's got more wrong. And he actually jeopardised the trial of people in these grooming gangs. Let's not call them grooming gangs, let's call them raping gangs. That's what they were.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And he potentially jeopardised the trials of those people by this contempt of court. So he's, you know, like all of us, Jeremy, he's complicated.
And
he's
so,
got good and bad.
Of course.
But Nigel Farage drew a line.
Yeah.
And I think it's not a clause 4 moment, for those who are old enough to remember when Tony Blair did this, but it is a moment when Nigel Farage has said to the British people, I'm not going to allow extremists to dominate my party.
Which was one, as you quite rightly said, one of the big criticisms. There were 2 at the last election, disorganised and a sort of rabble gathered together at the last minute. Will you stand? Can you see yourself standing?
No, I'm
You're
like,
going to be behind the scenes.
I'm like you. I know, we're people...
I was going to stand.
Not as handsome,
I thought you were going to run my campaign.
Not as handsome or throaty, but
no, thank you.
But you know, I think we're both people who can't take lines, can we? We speak our minds, and if you're going to be a candidate for a political party, you have to toe the line, and that's not me. That's not.
Do you believe that Reform, in 4 years' time, the party that you've defected to, will be a machine capable of... I mean, this is what I think will happen, right? This is me. I think that the Labour Party will get 220 seats, the Tories will get 220 seats, and I think that Farage will get between 100 and 120.
Hold the balance of power.
I absolutely believe that will be the case. I don't believe... I think you build... But I think that the other politicians are missing the point if they don't take him seriously. Actually, the next interesting thing was Starmer hits back at Musk today, and this is all centring as well about these raping gangs. Yeah. I'd love your take on this. I've been quite vocal today and in the past, probably because I'm a father of 6. If there is a cover-up, if this has come from whoever, I mean, that appalling email that's surfacing that apparently says, and I quote, you know, these children or these people made informed choices is just the most repugnant thing I've ever heard.
They couldn't. They were children.
We've had police say in the past, you know, we were worried about the cultural implications of arrests, which, again, in my world is appalling, because if you break the law, you break the bloody law, and you should suffer the consequences. But what does it say as a society? And this isn't just at Starmer's door, by the way. This has been going on a long, long time. Yeah. It does lead you to think that maybe there is a big bloody cover-up, but surely looking after the children is the most important, and pensioners in the world, isn't it?
Well, it should have been. And I can understand, you know, I think there were good motivations for the cover-up, in the sense that people were worried about race relations. But compared to these were vulnerable young girls. Some of the most vulnerable. They weren't, you know, middle-class kids. They didn't have families that necessarily looked after them.
But whether they're middle class or lower class or wherever they come from, aren't we as a society, as a world, supposed to protect innocent 100%, children?
And particularly vulnerable kids who couldn't stand up for themselves. And they were left on the altar of community relations to be abused in the most, I'm going to use the word wicked way. I don't know whether you believe in darkness, Jeremy. I do believe there are demonic forces in the world.
Well, I don't...
Really evil.
I'm with you.
What these girls were, you know, experienced was demonic.
I've said before and got into trouble. In my mind, people talk about rehabilitation and giving... Do you know what? There are certain people, right, like that... I nearly said the wrong word there. That man who abused, beat, bit, burnt and fractured the bones of Sarah Sharif, that one who's in jail for 40 years. Am I allowed to say anything, or are you going to look at me? Did you read the report about him being attacked? Yeah. No comment. There are people like that, in my mind, that are so goddamn evil, they do not deserve to be at liberty or even on the earth that I frequent. I really mean that.
Do you support capital punishment?
Absolutely, 1,000,000%. And people will say to me, that's wrong. You telling me Sarah Sharif's father deserves to... People will say to me, Jez, you're going off on one, he's in prison for 40 years, that's going to be hard. I'd go, it doesn't deserve that. But what I'm trying to say about people who abuse children... any sort of cover-up is repugnant to me, well, and I think, and I wonder whether Benedict is right that this goes so high into so many different parts of society that it's just swept under the carpet, which is a disgrace, because we live in a world where all the Liberals jump up and down and say, oh, what about that person getting a right? Or, hold on a minute, kids? Do you know what I mean?
One of the things that I was very struck with at the end of lockdown was, Nicola Sturgeon, who was basically one of the big defenders of lockdown.
Jimmy Cranky.
Yeah.
Just being honest.
You are bad. But what turned her was the level of abuse of children taking place in the homes. And I think we underestimate, just in the normal sort of abuse, if you want to, in inverted commas. But this was a different level. So,
final subject.
What a happy subject we're discussing tonight.
There's nothing happy, and this is going to get worse, because this for me is I mean, have you read this today? The government has opened the door to scrapping free prescriptions for the over 60s to raise more money for the NHS. So, again, you were a number...
What against pensioners?
You were a number 10 advisor, so here's what we're now saying.
Yeah.
If we don't freeze you to death, right? We're laughing, but it's a fact.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure that you can't afford the medicine that will keep you well. And guess what? You'll be back in the bloody hospital, which is absolute... How does that make sense, Tim?
It doesn't. It doesn't. But
it's just beyond me, man.
I think when the history of this Labour government is written, and it's we're 10% into the government, 10% what they're going to do in the rest of the 90% of the time that they've got. But I honestly believe that the abolition of the winter fuel allowance will be remembered as on their tombstone. The fact
poll tax moment for them.
Yeah, absolutely, because it was never heralded in the manifesto. They didn't say they were going to do this. It was there in the middle. They didn't. It wasn't like pain was being widely distributed. It was pensioners.
And it's almost as if, and when you heard that they admitted that 4,000 pensioners would die of the cold this winter, when you then think about prescriptions and you think about, in my mind, how much pensioners have given to society and what they've done and the stamp, I mean, it's disgraceful. But I'm very much with you. I don't understand, and you were an advisor, how somebody has not got the nuts or the intelligence to go, we're never going to be forgiven for this. No. And here's the thing, and this is pure reform policy, and I completely agree with Nigel on this. Foreign aid budget, I did a thing before Christmas. If you cut it by 5%, 5%, the 13 billion, so that's 1 point. That'd pay for the money you're apparently saving by freezing 4,000 pensioners to death. Doesn't make sense, does it?
No. Well, look, I support a foreign aid budget when the hungriest and the sickest people in the world, we should be able to help them.
Absolutely.
Because we are a lucky country compared to most people.
But I also want to look after my pensioners.
But that's a third of the aid budget.
There you go.
You know.
Absolutely.